to the Infinite Patterns, a Kaleidoscope podcast brought to you by Borealis Philanthropies Racial Equity and Journalism Fund, BKAREJ. I'm your host, Ty, and I'm blessed to be here sharing space with everybody today. And joining me today is a heavy hitter in the journalism community. We have Cayden from Convergence magazine. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really, I'm excited to be here and I'm excited about this conversation.
Absolutely. And so today's topic is, something that I know that we cannot all wait to hear more about. It's going to be the future of journalism, navigating ethical challenges in a digital age. But before we get started and dive right in, I would like to give the opportunity for Cayden to introduce himself, tell us about, who you are, what you do, and, and then we'll move right in.
Great. So I am the publisher at Convergence magazine. We are a movement media outlet that we publish in a digital magazine, and we also have a small but growing podcast network, really highlighting voices from social movements, trying to advance the analysis that people are bringing to the table when they're working on organizing our communities for a more robust multiracial democracy. I started at Convergence a little over a year ago. And Convergence has actually been around for a while. It's been around for almost 15 years. And it used to be called Organizing Upgrade. So some people might know it as that. But before I was at Convergence, I ran a digital first organizing group called 18 Million Rising, dedicated to organizing the Asian American community for racial justice only online. And I did that for about a decade. So I have a sort of like varied background that is not exclusively journalistic, but is very engaged with sort of questions of like, how do we deal with the way that the internet is changing our democracy and our society?
No, thank you for that. And one of the questions that I've asked, previous guests, so, just to get us going is, as we are, talking about our different topics for the Infinite Patterns podcast, kind of looking into, based on this topic right here, out of any topic, because we do have more in store for everyone in the coming times, what made you, look at this topic right here and be like, okay, this is me?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is I think like the preoccupation of like my whole life is this question about like how we shape technology and how technology shapes us. I dropped out of a grad school program where I was also spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think that, for me, actually, yesterday I was having lunch with a friend and his wife, and we were talking about sort of the beginning of the War on Terror era and how like I was 14 in 2001 when 9/11 happened. And my recollection is specifically that we were sent home from high school early and I spent the day doom scrolling on the AOL message boards. And so like I was doom scrolling before doom scrolling was even a term.
Absolutely.
Right. And also like thinking about where sort of the internet was in 2001 and thinking about the ways in which like the national security state and the war on terror and all these things have sort of like evolved like concurrently with the way that the internet works now is like something I think a lot about. And in my current role at Convergence, I have been doing a lot of thinking about like alternative business models for small media companies. It's been something that we've been talking about a lot internally, and especially with the changes on social media platforms. Like obviously we can complain about Elon Musk and Twitter all day, but also the deprioritization of quote unquote political content on Meta's platforms and stuff like that. It's like this question about like whose lives are political, right? And like the people whose lives are political are people of color, are women, are trans and queer folks. And those all those sort of questions are like a big part of like, when I'm in a room by myself, like what do I default to thinking about?
No, absolutely. It's just one of those things like when, when we're talking about like, navigating the ethical challenges in the digital age, it's almost like people are like, now what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Because it's like ethical challenges. What would those be? Like, how, like, You know, like how do we even, it's almost asking, would I have to question someone's ethics? Like when I look, when I click on my Facebook, oh my God, this may or may not be true. You know what I mean? And so like
Yeah.
how has that, oh go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, this also makes me think about, it's like there's this question of ethics is also one that also points to the fact that this is a larger system, right? It's like a larger
Yeah.
system that any one publication probably does not have the leverage to deal with by themselves, and so it feels like a
Mm-hmm.
really big ecosystem issue, and that's why I'm excited about, having this conversation in this context, because like, the decisions that a mega company like Google or Meta, which runs Facebook and Instagram, might make have huge impacts on us
Yes.
in terms of how we get content prioritized, how we find new audiences, how we even reach the existing audiences that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you add to that the fact that, like, a lot of the sort of financial crisis of journalism that we've been seeing over the past several
Yeah.
decades is driven by these same companies, and they're
Yes.
turning around and like trying to dictate the terms of engagement for us. I And then, getting into the whole like synthetic content, I refuse to call it AI because it's not
Right.
intelligent, y'all. Like, that's not what it is. But getting into the whole synthetic content thing, where like
Yeah.
now Google, for instance, is turning around and they have this program where they're offering outlets like a pretty sizable chunk of money on
Mm.
the condition that they publish multiple stories a week that is synthetic content.
Wow.
My friends and colleagues, Alex Hanna and Emily Bender, on their podcast, I think this was on their show. I listen to too many podcasts. It's also the situation.
Okay.
But I've got a couple of friends who talk a lot about AI and stuff on their shows. Yeah, they recently had a professor of journalism on, and they talked about this specific thing with Google, where it's like a
Mm-hmm.
couple $100,000 a year. Like, it's a lot
Oh
of
my
money. It's like a
God.
difference maker for a lot of people's newsrooms. But basically, they're trying to take the fact that people's, especially local newsrooms, are in such trouble, but
Mm-hmm.
then turn around and like turn those newsrooms into training data for
Oh,
their LLMs when
right.
they created this problem in the first place. It's really like, you can't fault an editor in chief or a
Mm-hmm.
publisher who says yes to something like that, because it's like,
Right.
you got to pay your folks. But also, what are the
Mm-hmm.
long term implications of that for the industry? Like, it's I don't I shudder to think,
Right. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, like you said, you can't judge, you can't judge for the people who are trying to help keep people employed and help, keep change people's lives and, keep them going. And also at the same time, it is scary to think about the powers that be that have the ability to create the problem can then hand you the solution at the price of what could be, you know what I mean, the actual transparency or the accuracy, because they almost can tell you what they want you to put out, knowing that it's going to shape how we think, what
Yeah.
we do, what we believe.
Yeah, and I think the jury's still out on how long this particular boom in
Mm.
synthetic generated content is going to be.
Yes.
um they're really pushing it hard for reasons that, like, I'm a very much like a follow the money person. I'm like, where
Mm-hmm.
is this money
Mm-hmm.
coming from? Where do they think it's going? It is interesting to me that in the conversation about quote unquote AI, a lot of the people who have the biggest platforms and are warning about its dangers are more worried about some like sci-fi bullshit. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Absolutely. Come on, bring it on.
As opposed to the very real harms that are happening right now, especially to like Black folks, Latino folks, immigrants. It's, like, those things are very real and they're measurable and they're
Mm-hmm.
observable now in real time. And in the meantime, the people who have the biggest platforms who are warning us about the quote unquote dangers of AI are more like, oh, AI is going to become intelligent, supplant humans. And I'm like, this
Right.
ain't the Matrix. Like, I don't know what
No,
so.
honestly, before, I actually, saw it in real time, I thought AI was like, everybody remember that movie I, Robot? with like
Yes.
Will Smith. So
Yep.
like to me, AI was like, oh my gosh, there's gonna be some robots. They're gonna take over the world because they're gonna be a part of this super consciousness. And
That's right.
you know what I mean? And so like we don't realize it's like the subtlety and the subtle ways that AI like, comes into our life with this new digital age and how it has access to everything or how people are using it for everything. And like, you know what I mean? Even going back to
Yeah.
like the era of, the digital age where everything is at our fingertips. Everything is accessible. I can even ask AI, hey AI, I need you to go ahead and do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, one, two, three, and they will give me something. Right. And so it's just like, what does that, when you need it to be accurate, when I need it to be true, when I'm looking for this thing, when I'm looking for Cayden to tell me how I need to think or what I need to do or what, or to inform me, I should say, on a certain thing, it's just like, what if Cayden's like, let me go ahead and just type
Just
it up.
like gobbledygook. Well, that's the thing, right? Is like a lot of the sort of general LLMs are trained on such a like massive amount of data that's just scraped from the internet, and we all know what's going on the internet:
Yeah,
lies, racism,
right.
sexism. Like, it's out
Yeah,
there. Like, if it's in society, it's on the internet, right? Like, that's the
absolutely.
thing that I think. I'm not saying the internet is any better, any worse than any other place, right? Because
Hmm.
like literally, it's just like
Yeah.
this is like our collective id, right? Like, and we live in a white supremacist, like patriarchal society. It is what it is.
Absolutely. Right.
And you can ask any of these general text generators to like write you a bio or something, and a lot of times
Yeah.
they make shit up about you. It's wild.
Absolutely.
It's like not useful.
Absolutely.
And I think that, this goes back to this thing about, I think, business models, right? And that I think
Hmm.
people are starting to really appreciate, especially, I mean, okay, the longer context for this to me is like the like misinformation crisis around the 2020
Yes.
election. And I mean, all the people who pay attention to this in a scholarly way are saying like it's going to be so much worse. There's already these
Mm.
like um I don't know, I think it was in I want to say it was New Hampshire or Vermont during their primary. Somebody, not a party, just like
Right.
somebody had gotten a call list, generated a fake video or a fake voice that sounded like Joe
Hmm.
Biden, and had him call voters telling them to stay home. Like, it's
Oh
bad.
my God. Yeah.
But I think that on the flip side is that more and more people, just like generally, even people who are not super tech savvy, are starting to realize that like there is a crisis of trust in our society,
Yeah.
and that
Yes.
like it's the role of small outlets, I think, that are like
Yeah.
scraping it out, finding their niche, to build those deep trusting relationships with people and be like, look, we see for things for what they are, and like we're
Hmm.
not going to sell you a bill of goods that we're not going to sell you a bridge to nowhere, and that we're paying attention to things, right? And that like we are
Yeah.
grounded in reality. We see you for who you are, right? And I think
Hmm.
I think that like the age of clickbait is rapidly coming to an end, right? That
Thank
like
God. Yes.
thank God. Yeah, totally. But one of the things I think that is a part of that is like I think more and more people are realizing that like we live in an economy that is no longer about scarce information; it is about scarce
Right.
attention, right?
Right. Ooh.
And
That, yes.
when
I'm
when
sorry.
attention is the thing that is most dear,
Hmm. Hmm.
and there are a number of scholars of sort of the internet and the way the internet and society works that have written about this recently, um that like we think like it fundamentally changes then the way that you think about your time that
Yes.
you spend with technology, right? um I'm trying to think. I'm off the cuff here. I'm like summoning a citation. It's like bubbling up in my head. I'll think of it.
Uh-huh.
But but that insight I think is super profound, and like I think more and more people are feeling that as part of their lived
Hmm.
experience with the internet.
Absolutely. I think, after, you keep seeing something and seeing something and seeing something, one thing about the internet and one thing about, digital in general, it's like I can go down a rabbit hole and I can spend however long I want researching one thing and finding the one thing. But it's really also to the people who just see that one thing and take it for what it is and move on. Right.
Yeah.
Because you also have to think about the generational implications of, like the digital age. All right. Because it's like not everybody has even though that they have the ability to have the access, not everybody's
Mm-hmm.
going to take the opportunity and, and utilize the tools that they have. And so I feel like, in the era of, I'm going to trust but verify. There are a lot of people that are putting things out there with the, like you said, the intent that, to possibly persuade, I'm going to try to say bias, and you're not going to go check. Not everybody's going to take that journey through the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, and like even savvy people, they can get you, right? Like if you're scrolling on
Absolutely.
Instagram in bed before you've gotten up and had your coffee and brushed your teeth and put your face on, like that's when you're at your most vulnerable, right? And
Right.
like I've done it too. Like I've seen something that has popped up on my Instagram feed and been like, especially, if we're going to talk about the crisis in Gaza and things that are happening
Hmm.
there, that like we are primed emotionally,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that like we need to make sure, and I think that especially our in our outlets now have a great responsibility to like make sure that we are propagating information that is
Yeah.
verified, because like this
Yes.
is a really intense time for a lot of folks. It's an intense time for um like our comrades who are Palestinian American. It's an intense time
Hmm.
for, I mean, a lot of our comrades who are just Muslim,
Yeah.
because like the Islamophobia is like it's alive. It is intensifying in a way that
Yes.
it really reminds me of, I mean, we talked about 9/11, like the
Hmm.
years after 9/11.
Yeah.
And so I think that in those kinds of fraught situations, we really need to be thoughtful about what we're sharing. And that goes for us just like as private individuals too. Cause like that's how stuff spreads like wildfire. And it can get even the most savvy of us. Um,
Yes.
like
Yes.
even like I, as somebody who used to teach media analysis to college students, right, like it
Right.
still gets me sometimes.
Hmm.
And I think also to that, like media uh this sort of like awareness, this media literacy, it's not an easy thing to scale, right? And I think that this is
Right.
the battle that we're kind of in right now, is that it's easy
Hmm.
to scale um people's feelings and like that knee jerk.
Yeah.
It's easy to
Yeah.
like find the places to needle people, but it's much harder to scale um even things like the sort of somatic awareness of like, does something seem off
Mm.
about this? Does this seem weird
Right.
to you?
Yeah.
Like that's not necessarily something that is easy to generalize to millions and
Hmm.
millions of people. um
Yeah.
and that's the situation we find ourselves in. Like it's a big challenge, and I don't have any answers. I just know that like from my life experience as somebody who's worked
Yeah.
in digital for a long time, now is running a publication, and also like literally used to teach media
Hmm.
literacy to like 19-year-olds, like shit ain't easy.
Right.
And it's a process, not a goal, right? Like
Right.
it's and I think that a lot of times when we hear like public, like elected officials talk about media literacy, they talk about it as a destination,
Hmm.
and I think there are some deeper problems in terms of like how we as a society think about education that leads to that, right?
Yeah.
But that it really
Yes.
is a process and
Hmm.
a stance, a way of thinking, a way of interacting with the world that um yeah, it's tough to teach people, especially in like the sort of like light touch environments that we often get adult
Yeah.
learners, let's say.
Right. It's especially, even just going back to how, like we engage with each other and especially talking about the light touch, right? Because in general, like most times you only get a certain amount of time for a period of time and you have to be, have to make the most of your impact, right? So what does that really look like? And then also too, like trying to be able to give somebody the tools that when they leave you, how do you carry this on? um, I want to talk about when it comes to like the the digital age and like the need for speed, right? Because as we know it's like, I want to be the first, I have to be the first. Like, can you touch on, especially like, kind of going the gamut from like, where your career started and where you are now, like how you feel, like how that affects, how you then put out news?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question because I think that, at least in my experience, over the past year or so, needing to be first has stopped being as important to
Mm-hmm.
me and to the models of the organizations I'm in. That
Mm-hmm.
like I remember in the like 20 teens, it felt like if you weren't the first person to post something, it was sort of like, great, so we're just going to be like glomming onto this thing. And so much of the
Right.
model of digital first advocacy that I was first trained in was about almost like anticipating a media moment and then using the cresting wave of that trend to get a campaign in front of people that then would
Mm-hmm.
like mobilize thousands, tens of thousands, ideally hundreds of thousands of people to like write to a senator or like give their feedback
Mm-hmm.
to a company. And like when I was not the ED, but in previous roles, I also did a lot of sort of like, you remember the Yes Men?
I think so.
These guys who like would like dress up and pretend to be like an oil company and announce that they were like, doing some like renewable energy thing, and then the press would
Mm.
ask the energy company, why are you not actually doing this? And then the energy company would be
Right.
embarrassed. Like they did this a lot in the I feel like this was like a very like 2000s kind of like
Right.
late 90s early 2000s like
Mm-hmm.
anti-globalization kind of moment thing. And so uh I have done a lot of yes men type stunts where like you create
Mm-hmm.
your own media cycle around an issue. um my claim to fame is that I once almost got the New York Times to publish a piece about something that was not real. We announced on behalf of the Gap that they were going to be signing on to
God.
this like trade agreement for ethical labor in South Asia, and
Right.
the New York Times had written up a story off of our press
Jeez.
release, but then they called their contact at Gap Inc. and they were like, "What are you talking
Oh
about?"
my gosh.
Um,
Like, just
so
kidding,
good,
Gap. Just
so
kidding.
good. um, it was a beautiful time. It was a different time. Um, you can't do that shit now. I feel like,
Right.
um, but like that was also about a moment where
Yeah.
people were really like you could manipulate that like feeling of needing to be first about something. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Um, Now, and especially in my role now at Convergence, and part of Convergence's model is also that like we have this editorial board that are all volunteer, and they do a lot of the hands-on work day to day of like editing stuff,
Mm-hmm.
setting our editorial line politically, stuff like that. And so necessarily we are moving much more slowly than like untraditional newsroom might, than a traditional
Yeah.
advocacy organization might. And there's something like really exquisite about that, to be honest, because like now I'm less worried about being first and more about
Yeah.
being like precise and like
Yes.
surgical about like the way I describe things, the way that we
Mm-hmm.
approach the world. And first of all, it feels good. Let me tell you now, it
Mm-hmm.
feels good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, obviously there's often urgency around things. We are
Yeah.
responding to the state of the world and we're thinking about what's going on. Um, and I think that like one of the business models that we've been looking at and that we've been thinking about are a lot of these like little niche media companies. So we've
Yeah.
been talking a lot about, I don't know if you're familiar with Dropout.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been looking at Dropout's model. First of all, they're interesting because Sam Reich, who's runs Dropout, is Robert
Mm-hmm.
Reich's son. I don't know if a lot of people know this, like former Secretary of Labor Robert
I feel
Reich.
like we're getting all this tea from you, Cayden.
I know too many things.
Right.
But what's interesting about Dropout is like they went from nearly being bankrupt as
Mm.
College Humor to being like a functional media business that like
Yeah.
they just sold out Madison Square Garden with like
Mm.
Dungeons and Dragons live play show, which is
Yes.
hilarious.
Right.
Um but also I think it also points to the fact that like they were able to find this sort of sweet spot of a
Mm-hmm.
small but dedicated audience that's like willing to give them, I give them $65 a year, you know, like that doesn't seem
Absolutely.
like a lot of money for like the
Right.
level of hilarity I get to enjoy. um and I'm also not one of the like super users who's like in their
Mm-hmm.
Discord like participating in their community,
Right.
but that like there is something about that that we're trying to tease out, like if there's something there for us to learn from who are dealing with,
Yeah.
let's say, a little bit of a more fact-based medium. um
Mm-hmm.
you know, that like we are a very niche media company, right? Like
Yeah.
our audience is largely people who are sort of already politicized, already thinking about like what the threats are to like realizing a real multiracial democracy in this country, and like
Right.
what we might need to do to get there.
Mm-hmm.
um and wondering how, by helping people slow down a little bit, find a trusted space to like interface both with us as a trusted source of information and with
Yes.
one another as like reader experts, can we
Mm-hmm.
build community? Can we build a business model that's more sustainable, but that's not like, we're not trying to be like hegemonic news and information. We're
Yeah.
trying to be, it's like you can't be everything to everybody, but you can be something to
Yeah.
somebody. And
Yes.
like
Yes.
that I think is really the future for small outlets, right? Is that like
Mm-hmm.
creating our own spaces that we own also, right? Like
Yes.
getting off of platforms that are going to dictate to us the terms of engagement
Mm-hmm.
and bringing our people with us, I think really is the future of building a sustainable business on the internet. Because like, you know, we can't trust that people are going to be able to continue to read our material on Facebook. We can't guarantee that people are going to
Right.
continue. I mean, even like, forget even about Substack or any of those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of platforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we are thinking about how do we build this stuff in house? How do we own it? How do we own those
Mm-hmm.
means of production? And like, how do we then create like well curated, well moderated spaces for people to talk about the stuff that's important to them? Because I think that like that at the end of the day is kind of like does go back to the
Mm-hmm.
media literacy thing too. That's like, do you have a community of people who are going to be like,
Right.
hey, there's something weird about this, or like, what do you
Right.
think about this? Actually, like, ask the question. Because
Mm-hmm.
like it's like when you slow down enough to ask questions, that's when you start like
Yes.
seeing gaps, right? Like and you know, I'm excited about the stuff that we're kind of working on
Mm-hmm.
around this, because I think that it's, you know, there's interesting stuff going on in independent media right now that I think we can be cross pollinating, not just in like
Yeah.
news and information, but also with entertainment. And uh, the same kind of like monopolization and consolidation is happening in all
Yeah.
information industries.
Yes.
So how can we learn from each other?
No, absolutely. I feel like, because here's the thing, whether or not we agree, whether or not whether or not anyone can navigate, whether or not you learn, whatever we think about it, not only is it here to stay, but it's gonna, the digital age is here. It's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to evolve. And so it's one of those things where it's like, as we are looking to the future, it's like, and navigating these times and navigating these spaces, how are we going to get to a place to where we stay informed, that we are also not only able to trust but able to learn from ourselves, able to continuously fact check. How do we fact check? What does that look like? And so I feel like, even just as we're kind of just like, coming down to a close, when you were talking about like, yeah, we're working on some things, or there are some things we can do, like the collaboration, if it's possible to speak a little more about some of the things that that you see happening, or like that your organization is doing in particular, and how we can be involved, how we can get involved, and you know what I mean, so that way we can try to not only keep the conversation going, and be like, it's almost like a call to action, like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you know it's here, this is what I have, this is what I know that's out there, and this is what we can do.
Yeah, totally. Well, one of the things I'm really excited about is that we are in the process of, right now we take in most of our like subscribers via Patreon, which
Mm-hmm.
again, walled garden platform. has been an absolute nightmare for me to use. It does not have
Ooh.
any of the features that I want as a publisher of a small media company. But
Right.
we're working on a bunch of research internally for like what are the right tools for that, to bring
Hmm.
it in house.
Yeah.
We have a great web developer. I'm like really honestly so blessed to work with them. um, and I'm really excited about we always do a membership drive in June, and so we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
rolling out some new tools for that in June. Um, and I'm excited about sharing that with this community also, because I'm like, look, like I think a lot of times when people look at the big shiny platforms, they're like, how could I ever build something myself
Mm-hmm.
that can compete with that? But the thing of it is, you're not competing with the platform, you're competing with yourself on the platform. And so
Yeah.
can you identify some features that make that like a more interesting opportunity? And like it's interesting, I feel like when I was young, a lot younger, I was like building a lot of websites in WordPress, and I feel like it's
Mm-hmm.
come full circle where like we're
Yeah.
looking at like WordPress is such a
Mm-hmm.
like lively ecosystem now that like a lot of these tools, like you don't have to like build it from scratch, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
don't think about building an app, think about like,
Yeah.
you know, what are the things that you can hack together that are going to actually like solve your problem.
Mm-hmm.
um and so that's something that we're working on. And honestly, I think part of the reason that we invested in a podcast network and starting building a podcast network is
Mm-hmm.
that not only do we reach people in all of the like pod places, right? Like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and we get to send people push notifications, but we still let people subscribe via an RSS feed. Good old fashioned
Mm-hmm.
RSS feed.
Right.
Like,
Right.
don't knock it. You know, like there are people who actually, the friend that I had lunch with yesterday, he's subscribed to us via our RSS feed because like
Absolutely.
he's just like nobody can own my attention. And like I think that
Mm-hmm.
there are going to be power users who care about those things, and like offering them, making sure people know that they're
Mm-hmm.
out there, um is also really really critical, right? And making sure
Yeah.
that your stuff is always available via an avenue that you own like that is like
Mm-hmm.
absolutely critical, because these
Yeah.
platforms, they don't we ain't shit to them, you know, like they don't care about us.
Come on. Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like when, at the end of the day, we have to do whatever we can, and we have to be, as available, and we also have to be safe.
That's right.
Because one of the things too that, just like I said, in coming down, it's like because everybody almost has access to you everywhere, everything is at a fingertips, all this information, including yours, is
Hmm.
also, what I mean? If somebody wanted to take the rabbit trail, it's easy to find, right?
It is easy to find. Yeah, it's too easy to find. Let me tell you, it is too easy to find.
You know, I mean, so yeah, so just kind of like, even talking about like what does it look like to safeguard yourself, safeguard
Hmm.
your community, safeguard the community that, is patronizing, your space.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things, and first of all, I think as like visible people on the internet, there's obviously some other things to consider. And um, you know, I've supported friends who've been doxxed. I actually,
Hmm.
interestingly, was teaching critical video game studies around the time of Gamergate, so I feel like I know too much. Again, I know too much. I've seen too much.
Right. Just kidding, big
um,
brother. Just
yeah,
kidding.
like look. But as somebody, I also have been the target of this kind of
Mm,
internet harassment. In 2020, I was swatted, which is when somebody calls in a fake uh, report to your
yeah.
address saying a violent crime has occurred, and
Mm,
prompting your local police department to send out the SWAT team. Um, One of the things that I have to recommend to everybody is Google yourself constantly. Know what
hmm.
information is out there about you. A lot of the sort of like public record search websites that people can pay like 15-20 bucks to get your address and phone number, like you can write to them and tell them to take that down, or you can subscribe
Mm,
to a service like Delete Me or Bright Lines that will do that for you. Um, a friend of mine who also has was part of my like post swatting like care and strategy team, uh
hmm.
it runs a company called Tall Poppy. that helps companies and individuals reduce their sort of digital footprint, think about safety from a like
Yeah.
collective care standpoint also, that I think is important. You know, a lot of times you get folks who talk about digital security as this like, you have to like lock up all your stuff, but it really is like a collective thing. Like after I was
Yeah.
swatted, the person who swatted me also threatened people in my network. So it really made it clear to me that this is about all of us, right? Like we have to keep each other
Yep.
safe. And the other thing that I think just the we could talk about technical security stuff a lot, but I also think that like as people who are engaged in producing media, that like
Mm-hmm.
having no phone time, it rules.
Yeah.
You know, like not, you know, I've taken a lot of the social apps off my phone because I'm just like
Mm-hmm.
I need to be away from it. I need to like not think about
Yes.
it. I need to be present with the people in my life and like enjoy the things in meat space that I enjoy.
Yeah. Right.
Because I think that wears you down. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
there's a non-trivial psychic cost to being plugged in
Mm-hmm.
constantly,
Come on.
that
Yeah.
like is part of our safety, right? Like
Yeah.
we and finding ways to be with people in ways that are not subject to like
Mm-hmm.
algorithmic filtering, not subject to like the creepy stalker tech in our pocket all the time, like
Yeah.
that's invaluable, right? Like it like
Yeah.
connecting back to your source, whatever that might be, like being in nature, being with family, being with friends,
Mm-hmm.
doing hobbies. You know, I'm a big this is really nerdy, but I play Magic the Gathering, like
That's okay.
a trading card game, like in paper.
Mm-hmm.
And like we joke, it's all also people who are like in their like late 30s, early 40s, and like we joke that like this is how we know how to be friends with each other. But it's so important to me because it like takes me
Yes.
away from the sort of like fire hose of information into an
Mm-hmm.
environment where like I'm interacting with people, I'm solving creative problems with my
Yeah.
brain in different
Yeah.
ways, and like finding that respite, whatever it might be, whether it's going on hikes,
Mm-hmm.
exercising, hanging out with your friends, playing games, whatever it might be, it's so important. um
No.
yeah.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that because I feel like a lot of times we forget about our actual selves, our real selves. It's pretty much what we do, how we do it, but it's not who we are. And so making
Hmm.
sure that we take the time to take care of ourselves, feed in, support ourselves, feed ourselves, in our spiritual ways, so that way we can continue to be, empowered to do the jobs that we do, to be who we need to be for the outside world.
That's right.
So thank you for sharing that. It's so funny because now that I was like, okay, we're going to talk about safety, we're going to talk about wellness. Now, Cayden, tell everyone where to find you.
Well, you can find Convergence at convergencemag.com. We have 4 podcasts, including one podcast
Mm.
that I host called Block and Build, and you can find that anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You can also find us on most of the social media platforms, although, like, I gotta say, subscribe to our email newsletter on our website. It's a much better way of getting stuff from us.
Yeah.
And you can find me. I have a Twitter account, but I very
Mm-hmm.
very rarely post. I'm at Cayden, just my first name, Cayden.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I post a lot of the stuff that I'm doing with Convergence on my LinkedIn, actually, which is like weirdly turned into my number one social platform because like
Oh,
people are like chill there and like not
yeah.
weird, which is like really surprising.
And not weird. Yeah, that is
Yeah,
hilarious.
yeah. It's like importantly, people are chill and not weird and like seem
Right.
genuinely curious. So you can find us there. And on most social platforms, we're just Convergence Mag. I think on Instagram it's underscore Convergence Mag because there was already a Convergence Mag. Weird.
Mm.
But yeah, come find us, keep up with our work. I will also say that like we are publishing some of the most like sober but also hopeful takes about what's going
Mm.
on in this election
Yeah.
cycle that you will find anywhere. So if you need a good healthy dose of like working class protagonism, we got you. Like
No, that's awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cayden. It was such a pleasure having you with us
Oh, this was
today.
so fun, Ty. Thank you.
Oh, Collette, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so happy to have you. And if you're just joining us today as well, we are talking about the future of journalism, navigating ethical challenges in a digital age. So before we jump in with Collette and this topic, I just want to give you an opportunity, Collette, to introduce yourself, talk to us about, who you are, the work that you do, things of that nature, and then we'll just get right on into it.
All right. Well, thank you, Ty. It's amazing to be here. I'm Colette Watson, also known as Coco. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm co creator and co director of Black River Life. And we are, I said that like everybody knows Black River Life. We are an emerging arts and media platform
Hmm.
that operates through a lens of serving and building community among African diaspora folks of Greater Phoenix, Arizona. So we are providing
Hmm.
news and information, safe cultural spaces, political education, all geared through a lens of Black migratory identity, resistance, healing, and power.
Yes. Oh, no, that sounds wonderful. Come on, Black River Life. We're so thankful to have it. We're so thankful to have you.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. So as we were talking before, as Cayden so graciously, blessed us, we're going to continue the conversation with you, Collette, as we are talking about the future of journalism, navigating the ethical challenges in the digital age. And one thing I was speaking before previously, and I want to ask you is, as you know, Infinite Patterns is, a wide range of topics as far as like, how we're, the things we're going to be bringing in, how we're going to be doing, our podcast series. But what about this topic made you say, this is the one that I want to talk about? This is, yes, I got something to say about this.
Well, our world is just about fully digitized. And so,
Mm-hmm.
when we think of that, it is assumed to be progress. But I think those
Mm-hmm.
of us who serve marginalized communities and those of us who come from marginalized backgrounds here in the US, particularly when I say the word marginalized, because we're the global majority, baby. But, you
Hey,
know,
amen.
we understand that not everything that is branded as progress is actually
Mm-hmm.
going to have a positive effect on our lives. So, am I saying digitization is bad? No, I'm saying it is so inherent, particularly for those of us in the information space, to really
Yeah.
have a clear headed understanding, view, and perspective, and strong ethics regarding the way that we're going to engage digitally and the ways that we're going to incorporate digital means and processes and tools into our work. Because what we've seen is that digitization via algorithms and sort of the profit model of the attention
Mm-hmm.
has vastly undermined the quality of information. And when you pair
Yes.
that with knowing that the original source of disinformation in this country is the idea of racial hierarchy, then you got to know
Mm-hmm.
that for us, it's a particularly urgent issue.
Hmm. So one thing too, I want to just kind of point out when you talk like the strong ethics behind journalism, because at the end of the day, that is something that I feel like people don't understand because they don't take into account like to question. Right. So if you could just kind of give a little bit more about like, when as I'm a journalist and I have to have strong ethics, what does that mean? Because some people just don't, they read the news, they're like, that's it. That's true.
They think it's just a piece of truth that is handed
Come
down
on.
mountain from on high into
Beamed
our
on down.
and that it always has been. For me, the first bedrock is understanding yourself in your practice of journalism as a member of community, not just
Mm-hmm.
as a lot of times journalism is taught to folks as needing to be practiced as a neutral observer. Now, this is going to,
Mm-hmm.
this might be weird to some folks, but myself and the folks I'm in community with believe strongly that we have to understand ourselves as a part of the communities that we serve
Yes.
because we in
Yes.
fact are. And
Right.
that, is an acknowledgement of your humanity as well as the humanity of the community.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, we have to understand the task of reporting of being one that must be tethered to history. There has
Yeah.
to always be historical contextualization of the stories that we tell. Too often,
Mm-hmm.
stories are reported as though the situation at hand has sprouted up,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
with no sort of background
Mm-hmm.
that informs how we got here. What's happening at the
Yes.
border? How did we get here? What's happening in
Mm-hmm.
Gaza? How did we get here? What's happening in Congo, Sudan? How did we get there? What's happening in Flint? How did we get
Mm-hmm.
there? When you report on, let's say, after a major storm, some folks are trying to get supplies to survive. When you report on that as though these folks just woke up and said, I don't want to be a criminal
Come
today,
on. Come on.
we're
Yeah.
not looking at the circumstances of their lives. What is the reality of wealth inequality in that community, and how did that come
Mm-hmm.
to face via maybe a redlining or another systemic dynamic? And then, is that community located in a floodplain? How do we
Right.
understand environmental injustice in the ways that Black and Brown communities, those zip codes are often the ones that are chosen for over industrialization? That can make
Mm-hmm.
them more susceptible to the major storms that are happening because of the ways that the corporate sector is poisoning our environment. So when you
Right.
start to get
Right.
into
Right.
history, you start to get to
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's being a member of community, reporting with history and context, and then most of all, understanding that right now what we call neutrality and objectivity is
Yeah.
really just a deference to a white dominated worldview. And I can say more
Mm-hmm.
about it. I'm gonna stop right there.
Well, well, listen, because it's first of all, thank you for that, right? Because I think a lot of people don't understand, or or we forget. I'll say that, and we all have the tendency to forget that the things that we see on the scroll, just because it's happening right now, the root cause of that happened some 400 years ago,
Yeah.
happened 200 years ago, happened 60 years ago, right? With the with the different laws, with the different things that come up, or the things that take place, like you said, in the system, right? So that way, by the time that we get here, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But you should believe that happened if you knew what happened 20 years ago, right? And so when we think about that, especially as it comes to like the digital and the responsibility that should be to be able to report on those histories, when you have such a rapid fire, how does one navigate that to be able to then share the past with the present and then kind of give context to the future?
Well, the way I view AI and some of the tools of this time is that we have the ability in the palm of our hands and in a matter of seconds to create stories.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And honestly, that, as journalists and news gatherers and reporters, we don't consider ourselves to be creative, but we are. We are in a
Yeah.
creative field because
Mm-hmm.
story has any number of perspectives, but the perspective we're after is the one of truth, right? And so
Yes,
with
yes.
AI and these tools, you have the ability to tell the truth, right? Or to tell something and make it seem
Mm,
full.
yeah.
But you also have the ability, for a little bit more of a positive view, to make the truth even more felt. And so that
Mm, mm-hmm.
and the
Yeah.
opportunity that we have, or the pitfall that we can succumb to, is utilizing these tools to either uphold a world of hierarchy and oppression, accepted as just the way it is,
Yeah.
or to really reflect the truths of the lived realities of oppression, the wages of the world that we have created, and use that as information to heal this world and the way
Mm-hmm.
it operates so that we can live full lives, full self-determined lives. That is the choice point that we have as media makers. And oftentimes we talk about journalism through the lens of upholding democracy, and a critical part of
Mm-hmm.
that. I would say that is true. And it's a critical part of deciding whether we can have a successful multiracial democracy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's there's a lot of storytelling that happens, as I said, filtered for and through a white worldview that then sort of
Mm-hmm.
compounds these myths and stereotypes we have of each other as a
Right.
pretext for keeping problematic systems in place. What
Yeah.
if our journalism functioned to do the opposite, functioned to,
Yeah.
amplify truth? And it does in some cases, but what if we understood the field as existing with the purpose of um, highlighting the truths of the reality of our world in a way that is geared towards repair, direct
Hmm.
of the harms that are experienced. And I think that is a different way of looking at journalism, particularly
Yeah.
in our capitalist society, where these AI tools and other tools and algorithms and things are giving us the opportunity to make a lot of cash, right, off of
Yeah. Yeah.
information. Um, but at the same time, we got to know that capitalism is really racial capitalism, and it is one of those
Hmm.
systems and processes that I'm talking about that is ultimately shortening
Yeah.
everyone's lives and quality of life. So it's a choice
Hmm.
point, where we have the chance to really be a part of making a new world, in the ways that we utilize these tools to make truth more present
Yes.
in society, if we choose to.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And one of the things too, I just want to go back to what you said, like we have using AI, we have the opportunity and the ability to make a lot of cash, right? But also at the same time, what's the cost? if
Exactly.
if I'm going to get something, what am I giving? What do I lose in order to gain? And like we were saying earlier, previously, there is no fault in some of the other media outlets or news outlets that would have to, because I know there was like a grant that came out where that they're funding these newsrooms for AI, and but also too, are they telling you what you can put out? Are they kind of filtering how you report your news? But also too, paying your staff, staying true, not having a business to report anything, or having to maybe almost, I don't know, compromise truth
Mm-hmm.
to be able to feed my family, right? And so that's when it talks about the ethics, the ethics game, right? Because it is, when you turn on the news, you don't know the backstory, you don't
Right.
know the people who have to feed their family because they're trying to make the passion,
Mm-hmm.
their passion, also to their profit. I have to be able to have a job, I have to feed my family. So can we just talk about, like, what it looks like to be able to hold true to
Mm-hmm.
ethics, as well as navigating, doing what we got to do to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I think things usually boil down to culture. I'm a strong believer
Mm-hmm.
in that. And so I feel that, first of all, I'm believing and manifesting and working and organizing toward a world where we don't have to hustle and scuffle to survive. So let's just say that.
Amen.
That's
Amen.
media field, that's real in every field, from
Yeah.
fashion to even the healthcare workers. Everybody
Mm.
is think, oh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna be a doctor and I'm gonna be rich. Child, these doctors struggling too. So
Yeah.
everybody's trying to figure it out because the wealth is being hoarded at the top. So let me start there. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to say, with regard to the very real dynamic you're describing, where there are people that want to do this in an ethical way, but also need to keep a roof over their heads, that when I talk about culture, I really believe we have to be about sparking new cultures and processes of journalism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, the culture that we create around what is journalism, what is valuable, et cetera, is going to be the thing that sustains. We can infuse
Mm-hmm.
all the cash we want, okay? But
Yeah.
at the end of the day got to end. No, I'm joking. At the end of the day, the thing, money will come and go. Inflation will rise and fall. Rates will change and
Mm-hmm.
shift. Profit models will change. 20 years ago, I'm a musician as well. A lot of us made money by selling records, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in the streaming age. You make
Right.
nothing off that because of another unjust system, another day's conversation. And so people have pivoted, and now money is primarily made by touring and merchandise and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So when it comes to media, who knows how media money will be made? We don't know if it'll always be clicks and
Right.
engagement and things like that. But what will sustain through all of those changes in technology will be culture. And so,
Yeah.
I'm also part of a group called Media 2070, which is a media
Mm-hmm.
reparations project that really is looking into what does reparative journalism look like. Shout out
Mm,
to my
mm-hmm.
colleague in that work, Diamond Hardiman, who's really anchoring and stewarding that. And it's early, and it's something that Diamond is organizing community with a lot of brilliant people across the country. But
Mm-hmm.
what does a reparative newsroom look like? What do reparative
Mm.
gathering processes look like? And I think,
Yeah.
as what is it like to make journalism doable for people? It's a very
Mm-hmm.
broader field, right? The corporate environments are toxic and just about impossible to exist in for folks of color,
Mm-hmm.
for gender queer folks, for trans folks. So it's a situation where we really have to go to the root, like you said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
like we were saying, and look at the way we conceive of news and information culturally, create a
Yeah.
culture, spark and expand a culture in which, whether you bring in AI or any other digital tools, that will still demand of us a measure of humanity and care in the way
Ooh.
we hold stories, in the way we hold each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I believe,
Like,
Di.
no, listen, and that's the demand humanity and care.
Hmm.
I feel like that is so important because, as we're talking about this digital age where everything is at our fingertips, every single thing, I can go to the internet and I can find whatever I'm looking for. It's the humanity and care that lacks a lot of times because, let's even bring up, I'll say, George Floyd, for example.
Yes.
I watched the murder of George Floyd
Hmm.
in,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in real time.
Hmm.
There was no hold on, there was no break, there was no, and people, it's like, some people felt like, we had to see it, we had to be there, but we don't understand the implications of the
Hmm.
things that we have access to. And
Right.
there is I don't want to say a lack of accountability or responsibility, because who would hold that, but also
Right.
too is there's a lack of understanding that we're just exposed to everything. But who helped us process through that? Did anybody go seek the help that they needed to after that? Like, what was the aftercare
Hmm.
of that? And that's just one instance of many things for many people that we're just exposed to without the dignity of the people involved, the humanity of the people involved, and also the care of the people who were watching. And so, if just I just want to throw that out there.
I know that's so relevant because whether it be these viral videos, Black bodies are treated differently. Black and brown bodies are treated differently in our media
Mm-hmm.
landscape. And so that's, a really clear example of what I'm talking about when we're not holding our industry, if you want to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
a standard of humanity and care. And I mentioned Media 2070. So in 2021, we put out a pledge to care for Black
Mm.
companies and journalists, calling on newsrooms. I think last time I checked, there were about 80 different organizations, including Mother Jones and a few others, that had signed on to this commitment. And it really
Mm-hmm.
lays out, you can check it out at media2070.org, specific ways to really change processes within newsrooms to really honor the concept of the idea of caring. And what
Yeah.
you just mentioned, the way that news platforms talk about and show visuals, right? That's a part of it. It's refusing to criminalize Black people. After George Floyd's murder, we started hearing all about every single thing he
Mm-hmm.
did in life. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, that was not what was that was the situation of how we came to know who George Floyd was a situation in which he was murdered. So
Mm-hmm.
criminalizing him does not help us understand this story and the truth of
Right.
and the realities
Right.
that it's indicating to us systemically. It's of in the pledge we talked about avoiding adultifying Black children. We put out the pledge
Mm-hmm.
that Akaya Bryant was murdered by police at age 15.
Mm-hmm.
And people online were really talking about that young lady as though she was some adult, and our children just don't get the benefit of the idea of their innocence. And then the last
Mm-hmm.
one I'll say, and there's a lot more, is a lot of the newsrooms really partner closely with police departments. You have reporters doing ride-alongs with officers and
Mm-hmm.
not being skeptical of those first police press releases that go out
Mm-hmm.
after there's been a police murder of a, of a person in our community. And the problem with that is that that's not how journalism is done with regard to any other type of story. There's always at least a couple
Mm-hmm.
of sources and some level of skepticism. So why is it all right for our police to be un to be believed and to have like automatic credibility in a way that
Right.
no one and nothing else in community does? Well, it's because right now, the journalism profession is perceived to be really serving this sort of neutrality that police get the benefit of believing that that profession is a part of too, when we have seen and we understand that the roots, going back to the history, the roots of policing in our
Mm-hmm.
country are not that. The police were not created to protect and serve everyone. They were created to
Right.
protect and serve private white property. So then it's extremely problematic to be pursuing truth, in the act of pursuing truth and
Yeah.
unskeptically parroting the points that are provided by police. So I didn't mean to go on that long time, but when you
No.
brought up George Floyd,
Yeah.
after his murder, they put out a press release that said, "Oh, there was a
Yeah.
little scuffle child, and I think he had a cardiac arrest. God bless, rest in peace." Excuse me? We saw the video,
Right.
and that's not at all what happened. But the police press
Right.
release was untrue. My grandma
Right.
told me you shouldn't say lies, so I'm gonna say they told a story, and that
Mm-hmm.
it was not accurate. And that's what our newsrooms
Yeah.
have to understand, is that if we're going to have truth in our communities, we got to be skeptical of those narratives in that pursuit.
No, it's almost coming back, like, it's bringing back some things in, to play here, because when you think about it, it's almost like the need to control the narrative or to give you something else to think about, and also to the need for the rapid response.
Yeah.
A lot of times I kind of feel like, the truth and the accuracy, at the expense of the time.
Yes. And let me tell you, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't cut you off.
No, 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 please go ahead.
So when I said earlier that AI gives us the opportunity to make truth even more felt,
Mm-hmm.
there's not it's funny, when we started having these body cameras worn by cops, a lot of Black folks said, "Oh, well, now," or a lot of people in society, not just Black folks, said, "Oh, now we're gonna have justice. Watch this." you
Mm-hmm.
know then for me, being a little seasoned, I remember when the Rodney King video came out, and a lot of people thought, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, now it's on video, they
Right.
uh can't deny that this is happening to our folks." And then those police were acquitted, and we had a rebellion and different things, and we keep having that over and over again, because what we got to understand is the technology itself will not get us free. The ethics
Mm.
of how the technology is applied and utilized, and most of all, the storytelling
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
accompanies that. So now with AI, there may be instances, because there may be instances where there's no video, right? Because we know for
Right.
generations we've been being, murdered and abused, and there was no video. But what can happen now with AI is, let's say there's an instance where there's a story that has emerged and there's no video. Folks can create a very
Yeah.
realistic video based on what though? Based on what?
Mm-hmm.
Based on whose story?
Yep.
What sources? Based on, let's go back to the George Floyd situation. Someone, a media maker on a deadline, as you mentioned, could be trying to
Mm-hmm.
get the story out and make it engaging to get those clicks. So
Yeah.
Big Brother Mark will serve it out to the people. That's Zuckerberg. I'm gonna create a video, and they this is not unprecedented. If you're my age and you used to watch, what was the show called, Unsolved Mysteries, they would do a little reenact,
Mm-hmm.
a little razzle
Yes.
dazzle on the story, right, right, right. You still see that.
Yes. Yes.
But now AI makes it so that you don't have to hire the actors. You can just create that
Right.
from scratch. Except, but what if it's
Mm-hmm.
live? So then that
Mm-hmm.
live travels. We already know. Grandma told us a lie travels 10 times faster than the truth. Gets around the world
Come
and
on.
back before the truth even get out of bed that morning. So now
Mm-hmm.
you have these tools that allow you to bring those stories, those falsehoods to life,
Yes.
them to people, have that be felt, right, on an embodied level,
Mm-hmm.
where you accept this as the thing that happened. Even if you have a little skepticism, it just feels more
Yeah.
truthful and real now. You take it out into the world, and we have disinformation on a compounded level because of these,
Mm-hmm.
because of these tools. And that's just one very small scenario out of thousands of scenarios that that are now potentially that are now possible because of the existence of these tools, and that we have to have the ethics and the truth in storytelling to combat the potential for that disinformation.
Oh, yes. I think it's the when you said the feeling.
Yeah.
And because a lot of times that, we are unaware that these visuals or the words are specifically used to invoke the feeling because, it is known that if you get your emotions involved, your actions will follow.
Yes.
Not truth, not emotions, right? And so that is something too, just to kind of, like take into consideration as, you understand you're watching the news or you are consuming, you know what I mean? These, these different, media outlets or these different posts or these different, things. It's like understanding why was this made? Who
Yes.
was this made for? And what was it designed to do?
Those are the key questions folks got to ask, Ty. You got it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it's just, and I feel like too, when it comes to like, the ethics and, and the future, right? Because we know that, at the end of the day, where everything is digital. Every single thing is digital. McDonald's is digital. Fries is digital. You may not see a person, and so being able to navigate that, successfully.
Hmm.
I'm still human. I'm still a human being living in a digital age. I'm still having a human experience
Hmm.
in a digital age. What does that look like for me?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I pose that to you.
Well, a lot of people are thinking about this. I love to follow the work of Ruha Benjamin, among others.
Mm-hmm.
When she talks about ustopias and this idea that our
Mm-hmm.
be beneficial and nourishing for the
Yeah.
collective we. This is what I think about with regard to the question of AI, to the question of technology in our lives. Another person who I follow very closely and am proud to call a friend is Malkia Devich Cyril, co-founder of Media Justice, who I remember talked about at one point we have to move beyond tech solutionism. And that really
Yes.
resonated for me because I think if we are
Mm-hmm.
going to ever have ustopia or
Yeah.
ustopias, that tech solutionism is not going to get us there. And a matter of fact, it will keep us away from it because the
Yeah.
idea that tech alone can save us, as I was just mentioning,
Mm-hmm.
history has already proven over and over again, is not real. That there has
Mm-hmm.
a real foundation in humanity, as you mentioned. So, when I think about the world and having this human experience, I love that the kids online now say touch grass because I think it has to
Yeah. Yeah.
there. And we have to understand that any technologies that we're creating, any technologies we get and we're deciding to try to use,
Mm-hmm.
we always got to ask ourselves, in service of what?
Mm-hmm.
Service of what?
Yes.
And, it's great to be able to quickly gather lots of information and perspectives. I can't remember the city in Spain where there's a city in Spain where they have experimented with using a software tool to allow people to vote very broadly and widely digitally on a variety
Mm-hmm.
of issues and have their feedback real time recorded, but also they're not gathering any personal data at all.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, your data is gone. And I'm probably vastly oversimplifying that, so my apologies to the people who know. But that struck me because to me, that's designed truly for the purpose of getting a democratic, sense of what this community wants for itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by taking the collection of personal data out of that equation, you're removing sort of like the corporate, profit incentive driven kinds of, and you're just serving the people and you're serving that.
Yeah.
I think that it was questions around the design of like uh, making the city more walkable, something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're thinking in terms of serving the people and serving the health of this land that we're on, and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, this air, this water, the real needs of human life, which is what you're
Yes.
born, you have family and friend relationships, you learn and grow, and then invariably we are all going to experience loss. So there's so much grief
Yeah.
We have no
Yeah.
idea how to, what would technologies serving the human experience of grief look like? And that's
Mm,
one sliver of the human experience. These are the kinds of things that I think about and the kinds of things that ground me in this conversation,
mm-hmm.
because I look around and the grief is compounding each day because of the
Yeah.
ways that we have designed our society. So much of it is reliant on technology that was created to serve shareholders, not to
Mm,
serve us as, a collective. And so this is the way I think about it, the kinds of people that I listen to and read up on and study. And I just think about the ways that, we can actually feed one another and heal one another, and
mm.
then how technology could be a part of that. Not the centerpiece and not the driving,
Right.
certainly not driven by profit.
Right. And two, just going back to the humanity piece
Hmm.
and the making sure that, and I like what you said, like it's okay for technology to be a piece, but
Hmm.
we don't have to make it all, right? It doesn't have to all encompass. It doesn't have to be a part of everything. If I want to go and, order my McFlurry from Dairy Queen because I do that often and they tell me they don't have it all the time because they don't. They don't have it.
How dare they?
Okay. But if I want to have a human connection,
Yes.
I should be able to continue to do that. And so instead of allowing the tools to take over, it's like we can use them for what they are good for, but also not forgetting that we are people having a human experience and not allowing the tools to take over. And so I want to just kind of talk a little bit about what does that mean for, a person, like a journalist who has to navigate the digital age to unplug, to get back to those human experiences and being able to allow those allow your unplugging to support you and just giving some tools for other people who may be struggling or may not know how to do that in navigating the future but not to be consumed by it.
I think I'm going to go back to the work of Media 2070 and
Mm-hmm.
Diamond again. Diamond Hardiman, shout out, shout out, shout out. My
Shout
friend, but
out.
only my friend. Um, I think back to a guide that Diamond worked on, that really held, it was called The Moment is Magic. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
tips from restorative justice practitioners for journalism. And I really
That's so
highly recommend
beautiful.
it. I think it was written with Alan Arthur, I think is his name. I might be getting it wrong, Alan. I'm so sorry, but I know his first name is Alan. And I thought it is so juicy because, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
answering your question through the lens of how journalists can really maintain their humanity while doing what they do.
Yes.
Hopefully that's okay.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
I hold space for the fact that journalists are people too, but I'll circle back around to
Absolutely.
that. And I think that guide though is so juicy because it offers so many concepts. One that jumped out at me was one of the indigenous kinfolk mentioning that your story is your medicine, and the
Mm-hmm.
way that it's shared has to be sacred. The way that it's gathered has to be sacred. And there's some
Mm-hmm.
stuff in there for how to work with people and ask questions and interview people who are facing trauma or in traumatic situations, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much in there. But what I'll say is that restorative justice as a whole, as a framework and a practice,
Mm-hmm.
offers so much to all of us in society, but particularly to journalists, because it's not about who's right or who's wrong per se, and it's also
Mm-hmm.
not about being neutral. It's about understanding that there is a such thing as harm and repair.
Mm-hmm.
Who has been harmed, and what can we do to restore that, that person, that entity, um, in pursuit of justice. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
that is ultimately the greatest calling of journalism, but it's not a simple undertaking.
Right.
Restorative justice teaches us that there is a lot in terms of care and carefulness and specific
Mm-hmm.
steps we have to take in the way that we even situate conversations around harm, that don't
Mm-hmm.
involve like carceral systems. How do we, so we can't just throw them away and throw them in the slammer? No. So
Right.
they're
Right.
really, we got to know that it's a very sort of detailed process and field, um, that and a lot that goes into designing that. And so
Hmm.
it's not just, hey, let's get together in a room, sit down and talk it out. I wish it could be that simple,
Right.
and sometimes it is, but it's never that simple, in the sense that that conversation is crafted in a very
Hmm.
way. And so we need to understand that our journalistic conversations have to be, crafted,
Yeah.
intentionally, and informed by a lot of the spirit of that field. Now, I will say, for
Hmm.
journalists trying to be human, because our society doesn't workers
Right.
much room to be human. We don't value that labor properly, so we don't compensate that labor properly, and then we really treat it as though, the labor that's being provided is kind of disposable, not understanding that it's part of the
Hmm.
underpinning of our society. Being able to be heard is everything. Martin Luther King said riots are the voice of the unheard. And a lot of times people are taking that to say, um, that people go out and riot because they haven't been heard. But what I take it to say is, riots are constant and ever present in this world. Nobody's being
Hmm.
heard. Nobody feels.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so with journalists, and storytelling and media making, we are providing the service of making people heard. So we're
Yeah.
offering a gateway to a society with abundant peace and
Hmm.
abundant truth. And so it should be, I feel, along with teachers and caregivers, these should be treasured labor. These should be, and healers. But listen, we're working on it. So I will say that until we get there, for journalists, there has to be so much rest and
Yeah.
dreaming and play in your day-to-day life.
Hmm.
You got to have a therapist. You got to have people that you got to surround yourself with, people you feel safe with. Um, and you got to be okay with not being perfect. You got to
Hmm.
be okay. You got to understand that perfection is a false pursuit. And you really got to try to find ways. When I said play, you got to find ways to have fun. So if that's having fun
Yeah.
with other journalists, fun in your community, go to a kickball game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, because play is really essential to maintaining that light that we had as children. And for journalists here,
Hmm.
the front lines are so much that is the hardest about our world. So you got to go seek out the softest aspect
Hmm.
of life to get that balance.
Hmm. Yes.
I
No.
think.
Thank you so much for that, Colette. Thank you so much. That is, if you have to take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, because if you cannot be good for you, what you're giving to everybody and everything else is at the expense of yourself.
And I think part of calling on newsrooms to care, as I mentioned with the pledge from Media
Hmm.
2070 earlier, I want to challenge newsrooms to create spaces and processes of play
Hmm.
and dreaming and rest for the folks who are a part of their operations. I think that's something we can do.
Yeah. Listen, you heard it. Create the spaces to play. You know what, Colette? I want to thank you so much for being here and to sharing your light and your wisdom with us. Before we go, because we're out of time, I want to just give everybody an opportunity to connect with you and to keep these conversations going. So tell us where we can find you, how we can get involved in the things that you're doing, what's going on with Colette.
Yeah. Thank you, Ty. You can find me at Black River Life. Also Coco Watson Life, if you want to hear a little singing too on the side. Um,
Amen.
and then blackriver.life is the website for our platform. And I'm still part of the family at media2070.org. So
Hmm.
that's media2070.org. Those are kind of all the places I roam.
Hmm. Okay. No, perfect. And also, before I forget, is that where we could find the juicy guide to?
Yes.
Yes.
It's there, absolutely. You can find it at media2070.org, or just Google "The Moment is Magic" and Diamond. And that's the first name of Diamond Hardman. It'll come up.
Okay, perfect. Well, Colette, I want to thank you so much again for being with us today. I hope everybody was blessed as I was to share with Colette and for Colette to share with us. You know, We have wrapped up another episode of Infinite Patterns, a Kaleidoscope podcast. Thank you, Collette. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.